Everyone, welcome to the Adventure and Mystery Book Club. I'm Bill Mallory over here at the La Jolla Library, and we are reading Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, the first of the John Carter Warlord of Mars books. And today we're going to be reading chapters 21 and 22. I will tell you, by the way, that we are actually 1 week away from finishing this book. We will complete the last chapter on a week from today, next Wednesday. So we are at that point again where we wanted to figure out what title we want to read for our next book. And tomorrow I'll put up again. I usually put up a list to sort of jog people's ideas and sort of hopefully give them a suggestion on some of the options that are available. As always, it is something that is in public domain and something that hopefully is on Project Gutenberg that will allow people to read for the entire book for free, basically. So think about it. Like I said, I'll in tomorrow's post, I'll put up the little list again. It's only a partial list, so there are lots of titles that are available and out there, and you can find one that you like, and we will start reading that a week from Friday. That'll be our next time. So anyway, just a heads up on that. So just to recap briefly what has happened in our previous two chapters. You might recall that John Carter has uh, sent off his love Deja Thoris and the Green Martian woman Sola on the back of a thoat, which he has then sent off running out of control into the desert to get them away from a large group of green Martians that were about to attack them. So John Carter takes on these warriors by himself and does a fairly good job of taking out a lot of them, but in the end, the odds are overwhelming. There are too many of them, and he is overrun and taken to another of the dead cities that is inhabited by these green Martians, which are called Warhoon, which are a different branch of green Martian than the Tharks that we have seen up to this point. So in one of our last chapters, he is taken to this grand arena, and there's going to be a big battle. And basically, this was the entertainment for the Warhoon, a much more barbaric a version of these green Martians than we have previously seen with the Tharks. And he meets another red Martian in this case, so someone of the same race as Deja Thoris. And this is a Martian warrior named Cantos Can. And he is also been taken prisoner. He was a survivor of the attack, the Green Martian attack on the airships that where they had captured Deja Thoris originally. And he has finally made his way back in an attempt to search for her. And while he was searching, he was captured by these Warhoon and placed in the same prison cell as John Carter. So the whole idea of these games is that they had collected up all these sentient beings and animals, and they had basically pitted them against each other to the death. They're all going to fight to the death. For some reason, they're either slaves or they're people who had fallen out of favor or someone who had done something wrong or something along those lines. And John Carter and Cantos Can are both part of this. And so at the very end, once that happens in rounds, of course, and the survivors will end up fighting at the very end. And in the end, of course, what else could it be but it is John Carter fighting against Cantos Can. They have killed all the other opponents, forced to by the rules of this game. And even though they have gotten to know each other and they've become friends, and he has explained this whole situation with Deja Thoris, and he Cantos Can, of course, who was looking for Dejah Thoris, is much relieved, and so they want to work together. And so they decide for a little subterfuge. And what happens is John Carter says, I want you to pretend to stab me with your sword, and then I will fall down dead, and then you will be the winner and you will be released. Those are the rules of the game, which they do. Um, the Cantos Can thrusts his sword. John Carter puts it in between his arm and his chest as if he were stabbed, and falls down dead on the ground. And everyone cheers, and Cantos Can is released. So they have agreed to meet at a certain place, but once night falls, of course, nobody really bothers his body. They just leave the bodies there to, to rot. And so when darkness falls, he uh, gets up, holds onto the sword, and with his prodigious leaping ability and his strength, he's able to escape, since there is no one really watching the arena anymore. He makes his way to the place where he had agreed to meet Cantos Can, but he's not there. And so, after a while, he keeps walking until he finds a very strange building. This building has a small opening in the front, not really an opening, but it's sort of an indentation in the side. Huge building, very tall, and like a tower, a spire. And he, um, uh, oh well, I do want to mention also there was really just a wonderful scene where John Carter is walking through the desert. He is trying to survive. He is asleep one night, and he is attacked by this creature. He doesn't even really know what this creature is. It's just that it's got a lot of fangs and got a lot of claws, and it attacks him while he's asleep. And he's fighting it, and unfortunately, it is getting the better of him. It is slightly stronger than he is, even though he is very strong. And there's this wonderful scene where Woola comes out and just from nowhere attacks this creature, and once again saves John Carter's life. And it's every time I see Woola, I feel happy, just because he's such a good dog. He's a good boy. So um, he and Woola are traveling. And they find this tower, and um, inside he calls inside, and he says, I'm lost in the desert. Do you have any water? Do you have any food? Do you have anything I can do to survive? And he is let in by a very old man, and um, he goes in, and the door opens on its own. There is no one there to open the door. The door simply moves back and to the side, and John Carter is allowed to walk inside down this hallway. Yet another door opens, and again with no one like turning the knob, or no one pushing the door open. It just opens on its own, and he walks through this hallway until he is inside the tower. And in the tower, he is given food and water by this elderly gentleman, and the gentleman says that while he's eating anyway, that this is an atmosphere plant, and that this is one of the places on Mars that can create atmosphere and make more atmosphere to replenish the diminishing resources of the planet. And John Carter says, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. How were you able to open the door without anyone there?" And he says that there is a lock that is tuned to thoughts. So all you needed to do was think a certain series of thoughts, and it would open by itself, and likewise close by itself. And so he thought this was very interesting, and he sort of he realizes once again that there is now we haven't really talked about this whole lot, but there is a large part of communication from the Martians is telepathy. They said earlier on in the book that the Green Martians don't really talk very much because a lot of their thoughts are just projected automatically telepathically. So there wasn't a lot of language to learn when it came to John Carter learning the language. And that over time, the time that he's been spending on Mars, he too has been gaining the ability to pick up the thoughts of those around him. And so, but the other side is that the Martians cannot read his thoughts. So it only goes one way. He can read theirs, but they cannot read his. So knowing this, he says to the man, really, what is the combination of thoughts that opens the door? And in an instant, there flashes in the old man's mind a series of musical notes that, when thought of in order, open the doors. But then, of course, the words that he speaks are, "Oh, I'm sorry, but that is not information that I can tell you." And then John Carter also picks up on the idea that this old man has suddenly become very uncomfortable with his visitor and realizes that perhaps it would be better if he was not around. And so John Carter picks up the idea from him that at night, when he is asleep, the old man is going to come back and he's going to kill him. So be careful of your host in Mars, apparently. Um, so, of course, what they do is they wait till dark. He waits until he can telepathically sense the thoughts of the old man coming towards him, and the man, in this case, is going to go check on some of the atmosphere plant machinery, and goes off, and then he's going to come back with his knife. So John Carter gets up. He tries the mental combination for the lock, and surprise, surprise, it opens. So he has figured out how to telepathically open the locks. The doors slide to the side, and he and Woola escape. One of the things he's found out is that he is very near another of the Red Martian cities, the hereditary enemies of the Deja Thoris's people and Cantos Can's people, those of Helium. The other city is called Zodanga. So the old man, at least during the time he was being friendly to John Carter, tells him, don't tell them you're trying to get to Helium and find the Red Martians there, because you're in Zodanga territory now. You need to tell people that you're from Zodanga and that you're looking to get back there. And so he and Woola go out into the desert again to escape this old man and to escape this atmosphere plant, and they come across some farmers. And the farmers are very nice family. There's brothers and sisters, and they all have wives and children, and they are all, basically give him shelter and food for a few days until he is back on his feet and ready to kind of go on. And using the old man's advice, he tells them, oh yes, I'm from Zodanga and I'm trying to get back there, and can you help me? And they're like, hey, great, we love Zodanga. Zodanga's our city too, so we'll be glad to help you. And then the chapter ends when he is given supplies. He's even given money by them, and he heads off to the Red Martian city of Zodanga. So, that was a long recap there. There's a lot of stuff going on in this story, especially as we get, now we're approaching the end in a week's time. So if you're ready, we will read chapter 21, which is entitled An Air Scout for Zodanga. As I proceeded on my journey towards Zodanga, many strange and interesting sights arrested my attention, and at the several farmhouses where I stopped, I learned a number of new and instructive things concerning the methods and manners of Barsoom. The water which supplies the farms of Mars is collected in immense underground reservoirs at either pole from the melting ice caps and pumped through long conduits to the various populated centers. Along either side of these conduits and extending their entire length lie the cultivated districts. These are divided into tracts of about the same size, each tract being under the supervision of one or more government officers. Instead of flooding the surface of the fields, thus wasting immense quantities of water by evaporation, the precious liquid is carried underground through a vast network of small pipes, directly to the roots of the vegetation. The crops upon Mars are always uniform, for there are no droughts, no rains, no high winds, and no insects or destroying birds. On this trip, I tasted the first meat I had eaten since leaving Earth: large, juicy steaks and chops from the well-fed domestic animals of the farms. I also enjoyed luscious fruits and vegetables, but not a single article of food which was exactly similar to anything on Earth. Every plant and flower and vegetable and animal had been so refined by ages of careful scientific cultivation and breeding that the like of them on Earth dwindled into pale gray, characterless nothingness by comparison. At a second stop, I met some highly cultivated people of the noble class, and while in conversation, we chanced to speak of helium. One of the older men had been there on a diplomatic mission several years before and spoke with regret of the conditions which seemed destined ever to keep these two countries at war. Helium, he said, rightly boasts the most beautiful women of Barsoom, and of all her treasures the wonderful daughter of Mor's Kajak, Deja Thoris, is the most exquisite flower. Why, he added, the people really worship the ground she walks upon, since her loss on that ill-starred expedition. All Helium has been draped in mourning. That our ruler should have attacked the disabled fleet as it was returning to Helium was but another of his awful blunders, which I fear will sooner or later compel Zodanga to elevate a wiser man in his place. Even now, though our victorious armies are surrounding Helium, the people of Zodanga are voicing their displeasure, for the war is not a popular one, since it is not based on right or justice. Our forces took advantage of the absence of the principal fleet of Helium on their search for the princess, and so we have been able to easily to reduce the city to a sorry plight. It is said she will fall within the next few passages of the further moon. And what, think you, may have been the fate of the Princess Deja Thoris? I asked, as casually as possible. She is dead, he answered. This much was learned from a green warrior recently captured by our forces in the south. She escaped from the hordes of Thark with a strange creature of another world, only to fall into the hands of the Warhoons. Their thoats were found wandering upon the sea bottom, and evidences of a bloody conflict were discovered nearby. While this information was in no way reassuring, neither was it at all conclusive proof of the death of Deja Thoris, and so I determined to make every effort possible to reach Helium as quickly as I could and carry to Tardos Mors such news of his granddaughter's possible whereabouts as lay in my power. 10 days after leaving the three Pator brothers, I arrived at Zodanga. From the moment that I had come into contact with the red inhabitants of Mars, I had noticed that Woola drew a great amount of unwelcome attention to me, since the huge brute belonged to a species which is never domesticated by the red men. Were one to stroll down Broadway with a Numidian lion at his heels, the effect would be somewhat similar to that which I should have produced had I entered Zodanga with Woola. The very thought of parting with the faithful fellow caused me so great regret and genuine sorrow that I put it off until just before we arrived at the city gates. But then, finally, it became imperative that we separate. Had nothing further than my own safety or pleasure been at stake, no argument would have prevailed upon me to turn away the one creature upon Barsoom that had never failed in a demonstration of affection and loyalty. But as I would willingly have offered my life in the service of her and in search of whom I was about to challenge the unknown dangers of this, to me, mysterious city, I would not permit even Woola's life to threaten the success of my venture, much less his momentary happiness, for I doubted not he soon would forget me. And so I bade the poor beast an affectionate farewell, promising him, however, that if I came through my adventure in safety, that in some way I should find the means to search him out. He seemed to understand me fully, and when I pointed back in the direction of Thark, he turned sorrowfully away. Nor could I bear to watch him go, but resolutely set my face towards Zodanga, with a touch of heartsickness approached her frowning walls. The letter I bore from them gained me an immediate entrance to the vast walled city. It was still very early in the morning, and the streets were practically deserted. The residences, raised high upon the metal columns, resembled huge rookeries. Excuse me, getting all choked up over here over the loss of Woola. While the uprights themselves presented the appearance of steel tree trunks. The shops, as a rule, were not raised from the ground, nor were their doors bolted or barred, since thievery is practically unknown upon Barsoom. Assassination is the ever-present fear of all Barsoomians, and for this reason alone their homes are raised high above the ground at night or in times of danger. The Pator brothers had given me explicit directions for reaching the point of the city where I could find living accommodations and be near the offices of the government agents to whom they had given me letters. My way led to the central square, or plaza, which is a characteristic of all Martian cities. The plaza of Zodanga covers a square mile and is bounded by the palaces of the Jeddak, the Jeds, and the other members of the royalty and nobility of Zodanga, as well as the principal public buildings, cafes, and shops. As I was crossing the great square, lost in wonder and admiration of the magnificent architecture and the gorgeous scarlet vegetation which carpeted the broad lawns, I discovered a red Martian walking briskly toward me from one of the avenues. He paid not the slightest attention to me, but as he came abreast, I recognized him, and turning, I placed my hand upon his shoulder, calling out, "Cor, Cantos can!" Like lightning he wheeled, and before I could so much as lower my hand, the point of his long sword was at my breast. "Who are you?" he growled, and then a backward leap carried me 50 feet from his sword. He dropped the point to the ground and exclaimed, laughing, "I do not need a better reply. There is but one man upon all Barsoom who can bounce like that about like a rubber ball. By my mother of the further moon, John Carter, how came you here? And have you become a Darsine that you can change your color at will?" "You gave me a bad half-minute, my friend," he continued, after I had briefly outlined my adventures since parting with him in the arena at Warhoon. "Were my name and city known to the Zodangans, I would shortly be sitting on the banks of the lost Sea of Koras with my revered and departed ancestors. I am here in the interests of Tardos Mors, a Jeddak of Helium, to discover the whereabouts of Deja Thoris, our princess. Sab Than, Prince of Zodanga, has her hidden in the city and has fallen madly in love with her. His father, Thankosis, Jeddak of Zodanga, has made her voluntary marriage to his son the price of peace between our countries. But Tardos Mors will not accede to the demands and has sent word that he and his people would rather look upon the dead face of their princess than see her wed to any than her own choice, and that personally he would prefer being engulfed in the ashes of a lost and burning helium to joining the metal of his house with that of Thankosis. His reply was the deadliest affront he could have put upon Thankosis and the Zodangans. But his people love him the more for it, and his strength in helium is greater today than ever. I have been here 3 days, continued Cantos Can, but I have not yet found where Deja Thoris is imprisoned. Today I join the Zodangan Navy as an air scout, and I hope in this way to win the confidence of Sab Than, the prince, who is commander of this division of the Navy, and thus learn the whereabouts of Deja Thoris. I'm glad you are here, John Carter, for I know your loyalty to my princess, and two of us working together should be able to accomplish much. The plaza was now commencing to fill with people going and coming upon the daily activities of their duties. The shops were opening and the cafes filling with early morning patrons. Cantos Can led me to one of the gorgeous eating places where we were served entirely by mechanical apparatus. No hand touched the food from the time it entered the building in its raw state until it emerged hot and delicious upon the tables before the guests, in response to the touching of tiny buttons to indicate their desires. After our meal, Cantos Can took me with him to the headquarters of the Air Scout Squadron, and, introducing me to his superior, asked that I be enrolled as a member of the Corps. In accordance with custom, an examination was necessary, but Cantos Ken had told me to have no fear on this score, as he would attend to that part of the matter. He accomplished this by taking my order for examination to the examining officer and representing himself as John Carter. This ruse will be discovered later, he cheerfully exclaimed, when they check up my weights, measurements, and other personal identification data, but it will be several months before this is done, and our mission should be accomplished or have failed before that time. The next few days were spent by Cantos Can in teaching me the intricacies of flying and of repairing the dainty little contrivances which the Martians use for this purpose. The body of the one-man aircraft is about 16 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 3 inches thick, tapering to a point at each end. The driver sits on top of this plane upon a seat constructed over the small, noiseless radium engine which propels it. The medium of buoyancy is contained within the thin metal walls of the body and consists of the 8th Barsoomian ray, or ray of propulsion, as it may be termed in view of its properties. This ray, like the 9th ray, is unknown on Earth, but the Martians have discovered that it is an inherent property of all light, no matter from what source it emanates. They have learned that it is the solar 8th ray which propels the light of the sun to the various planets, and that it is the individual 8th ray of each planet which reflects or propels the light thus obtained out into space once more. The solar 8th ray would be absorbed by the surface of Barsoom, but the Barsoomian 8th ray, which tends to propel light from Mars into space, is constantly streaming out from the planet, constituting a force of repulsion of gravity, which, when confined, is able to lift enormous weights from the surface of the ground. It is this ray which has enabled them to so perfect aviation that battleships far outweighing anything known upon earth sail as gracefully and lightly through the thin air of Barsoom as a toy balloon in the heavy atmosphere of Earth. During the early years of their discovery of this ray, many strange accidents occurred before the Martians learned to measure and control the wonderful power they had found. In one instance, some 900 years before the first great battleship to be built with the eighth ray reservoirs was stored with too great a quantity of the rays, and she had sailed up from helium with 500 officers and men, never to return. Her power of repulsion for the planet was so great that it had carried her far into space, where she can be seen today by the aid of powerful telescopes hurtling through the heavens 10,000 miles from Mars, a tiny satellite that will thus encircle Barsoom to the end of time. The fourth day after my arrival at Zodanga, I made my first flight, and as a result of it, I won a promotion which included quarters in the palace of Thankosis. As I rose above the city, I circled several times, as I had seen Kantos Kan do, and then, throwing my engine into top speed, I raced at terrific velocity toward the south, following one of the great waterways which enters Zodanga from that direction. I had traversed perhaps 200 miles in a little less than an hour when I descried far below me a party of 3 green warriors racing madly toward a small figure on foot which seemed to be trying to reach the confines of one of the walled fields. Dropping my machine rapidly toward them and circling to the rear of the warriors, I soon saw that the object of their pursuit was a red Martian wearing the medal of the scout squadron to which I was attached. A short distance away lay his tiny flyer, surrounded by the tools with which he had evidently been occupied in repairing some damage when surprised by the green warriors. They were now almost upon him, their flying mounts charging down on the relatively puny figure at terrific speed. While the warriors leaned low to the right, with their great metal shod spears, each seemed striving to be the first to impale the poor Zodangan, and in another moment his fate would have been sealed had it not been for my timely arrival. Driving my fleet aircraft at high speed directly behind the warriors, I soon overtook them, and without diminishing my speed, I rammed the prow of my little flyer between the shoulders of the nearest. The impact sufficient to have torn through inches of solid steel hurled the fellow's headless body into the air over the head of his throat, where it fell, sprawling upon the moss. The mounts of the other 2 warriors turned, squealing in terror, and bolted in opposite directions. Reducing my speed, I circled and came to the ground at the feet of the astonished Zodangan. He was warm in his thanks for my timely aid, and promised that my day's work would bring the reward it merited, and for it was none other than a cousin of the Jeddak of Zodanga whose life I had saved. We wasted no time in talk, as we knew that the warriors would surely return as soon as they had gained control of their mounts. Hastening to his damaged machine, we were bending every effort to finish the needed repairs, and had almost completed them when we saw the 2 green monsters returning at top speed from opposite sides of us. When they had approached within 100 yards, their throats again became unmanageable and absolutely refused to advance further toward the aircraft which had frightened them. The warriors finally dismounted and, hobbling their animals, advanced toward us on foot with drawn longswords. I advanced to meet the larger, telling the Zodangan to do the best he could with the other. finishing my man with almost no effort, as had now from much practice become habitual with me, I hastened to return to my new acquaintance, from whom I found indeed in desperate straits. He was wounded and down, with the huge foot of his antagonist upon his throat, and the great longsword raised to deal the final thrust. With a bound, I cleared the 50 feet intervening between us, and with outstretched point drove my sword completely through the body of the green warrior. His sword fell harmless to the ground, and he sank limply upon the prostrate form of the Zodangan. A cursory examination of the latter revealed no mortal injuries, and after a brief rest, he asserted that he felt fit to attempt the return voyage. He would have to pilot his own craft, however, as these frail vessels are not intended to convey but a single person. Quickly completing the repairs, we rose together into the still, cloudless Martian sky, and at great speed, without further mishap, returned to Zodanga. As we neared the city, we discovered a mighty concourse of civilians and troops assembled upon the plain before the city. The sky was black with naval vessels and private and public pleasure craft, flying long streamers of gay-colored silks, and banners and flags of odd and picturesque design. My companion signaled that I slow down, and running his machine close beside mine, suggested that we approach and watch the ceremony, which, he said, was for the purpose of conferring honors on individual officers and men for bravery and other distinguished service. He then unfurled a little ensign, which denoted that his craft bore a member of the royal family of Zodanga, and together we made our way through the maze of low-flying air vessels until we hung directly over the Jeddak of Zodanga and his staff. All were mounted upon the small domestic bull thoats of the Red Martians, and their trappings and ornamentation bore such a quantity of gorgeously colored feathers that I could not but be struck with the startling resemblance the concourse bore to a band of red Indians of my own earth. One of the staff called the attention of Thancosis to the presence of my companion above them, and the ruler motioned for him to descend. As they waited for the troops to move into position facing the Jeddak, the two talked earnestly together, the Jeddak and his staff occasionally glancing up at me. I could not hear their conversation, and presently it ceased, and all dismounted as the last body of troops had wheeled into position before their emperor. A member of the staff advanced towards the troops, and calling the name of a soldier, commanded him to advance. The officer then recited the nature of the heroic act which had won the approval of the Jeddak, and the latter advanced and placed a metal ornament upon the left arm of the lucky man. 10 men had been so decorated when the aide called out, "John Carter, Air Scout." Never in my life had I been so surprised, but the habit of military discipline is strong within me, and I dropped my little machine lightly to the ground and advanced on foot, as I had seen the others do. As I halted before the officer, he addressed me in a voice audible to the entire assemblage of troops and spectators. "In recognition, John Carter," he said, "of your remarkable courage and skill in defending the person of the cousin of the Jeddak Thancosis, and single-handed vanquishing 3 green warriors, it is the pleasure of our Jeddak to confer on you the mark of his esteem." Thancosis then advanced toward me, and placing an ornament upon me, said, "My cousin has narrated the details of your wonderful achievement, which seems little short of miraculous. And if you can so well defend a cousin of the Jeddak, how much better could you defend the person of the Jeddak himself? You are therefore appointed a padwar of the guards of and will be quartered in my palace hereafter. I thanked him, and at his direction joined the members of his staff. After the ceremony, I returned to my machine to its quarters on the roof of the barracks of the Air Scout Squadron, and with an orderly from the palace, rather, to guide me, I reported to the officer in charge of the palace. Chapter 22. I Find Deja. The major domo to whom I reported had been given instructions to station me near the person of the Jeddak, who, in time of war, is always in great danger of assassination, as the rule that all is fair in war seemed to constitute the entire ethics of Martian conflict. He therefore escorted me immediately to the apartment in which Thancosis then was. The ruler was engaged in conversation with his son, Sabthan, and several courtiers of his household, and did not perceive my entrance. The walls of the apartment were completely hung with splendid tapestries, which hid any windows or doors which may have pierced them. The room was lighted by imprisoned rays of sunshine held between the ceiling proper and what appeared to be a ground glass false ceiling a few inches below. My guide drew aside one of the tapestries, disclosing a passage which encircled the room between the hangings and the walls of the chamber. Within this passage I was to remain, he said, so long as Thancosis was in the apartment. When he left, I was to follow. My only duty was to guard the ruler and keep out of sight as much as possible. I would be relieved after a period of 4 hours. The major domo then left me. The tapestries were of a strange weaving, which gave the appearance of heavy solidity from one side, but from my hiding place I could perceive all that took place within the room as readily as though there had been no curtain intervening. Scarcely had I gained my post than the tapestry at the opposite end of the chamber separated, and 4 soldiers of the guard entered, surrounding a female figure. As they approached Thancosis, the soldiers fell to either side, and there, standing before the Jeddak, and not 10 feet from me, her beautiful face radiant with smiles, was Dejah Thoris. Sabthan, Prince of Zodanga, advanced to meet her, and hand in hand they approached close to the Jeddak. Thancosis looked up in surprise, and, rising, saluted her. To what strange freak do I owe this visit from the Princess of Helium, who, 2 days ago, with rare consideration for my pride, assured me that she would prefer Talhajas, the green Thark, to my son? Dejah Thoris only smiled the more, and, with a roguish dimples playing at the corners of her mouth, she made answer. From the beginning of time upon Barsoom, it has been the prerogative of woman to change her mind as she listed, and to dissemble in matters concerning her heart. That you will forgive, Thancosis, as has your son. 2 days ago I was not sure of his love for me, but now I am, and I have come to beg of you to forget my rash words, and to accept the assurance of the Princess of Helium that when the time comes she will wed Sabthan, Prince of Zodanga. I am glad that you have so decided, replied Thancosis. It is far from my desire to push war further against the people of Helium, and your promise shall be recorded, and a proclamation to my people issued forthwith. It were better, Thancosis, interrupted Dejah Thoris, that the proclamation wait the ending of this war. It would look strange indeed to my people and to yours were Princess of Helium to give herself to her country's enemy in the midst of hostilities. Cannot the war be ended at once? Spoke Seb Than. It requires but the word of Thancosus to bring peace. Say it, my father, say the word, and that will hasten my happiness and end this unpopular strife. We shall see, replied Thancosus, how the people of Helium take to peace. I shall at least offer it to them. Dejah Thoris, after a few words, turned and left the apartment, still followed by her guards. Thus was the edifice of my brief dream of happiness dashed, broken, to the ground of reality. The woman for whom I had offered my life, and from whose lips I had so recently heard a declaration of love for me, had lightly forgotten my very existence and smilingly given herself to the son of her people's most hated enemy. Although I had heard it with my own ears, I could not believe it. I must search out her apartments and force her to repeat the cruel truth to me alone before I would be convinced, and so I deserted my post and hastened through the passage behind the tapestries toward the door by which she had left the chamber. Slipping quietly through this opening, I discovered a maze of winding corridors branching and turning in every direction. Running rapidly down the first one and then another of them as I soon became hopelessly lost and was standing, panting, against a side wall when I heard voices near me. Apparently they were coming from the opposite side of the partition against which I leaned, and presently I made out the tones of Dejah Thoris. I could not hear the words, but I knew that I could not possibly be mistaken in the voice. Moving on a few steps, I discovered another passageway, at the end of which lay a door. Walking boldly forward, I pushed into the room only to find myself in a small antechamber, in which there were 4 guards who had accompanied her. One of them instantly arose and accosted me, asking the nature of my business. I am from Thancosus, I replied, and wish to speak privately with Dejah Thoris, Princess of Helium. And your order? Asked the fellow. I did not know what he meant, but replied that I was a member of the guard, and without waiting for a reply from him, I strode toward the opposite door of the antechamber, behind which I could hear Dejah Thoris conversing. But my entrance was not to be so easily accomplished. The guardsman stopped before me, saying, No one comes from Thancosus without carrying an order or the password. You must give me one or the other before you may pass. The only order I require, my friend, to enter where I will, hangs at my side, I answered, tapping my long sword. Will you let me pass in peace, or no? For reply, he whipped out his own sword, calling to the others to join him, and thus the 4 stood with drawn weapons, barring my further progress. You are not here by the order of Thancosus, cried the one who had first addressed me. And not only shall you not enter the apartments of the Princess of Helium, you shall go back to Thancosus under guard to explain this unwarranted temerity. Throw down your sword. You cannot hope to overcome 4 of us, he added with a grim smile. My reply was a quick thrust which left me but 3 antagonists, and I can assure you that they were worthy of my mettle. They had me backed against the wall in no time, fighting for my life. Slowly I worked my way to a corner of the room where I could force them to come at me only one at a time, and thus we fought upward of 20 minutes, the clanging of steel on steel, producing a veritable bedlam in this little room. The noise had brought Dejah Thoris to the door of her apartment, and there she stood throughout the conflict with Sola at her back, peering over her shoulder. Her face was set and emotionless, and I knew that she did not recognize me, nor did Sola. Finally, a lucky cut brought down a second guardsman, and then, with only two opposing me, I changed my tactics and rushed them down after the fashion of my fighting that had won me many a victory. The third fell within 10 seconds after the second, and the last lay dead upon the bloody floor a few moments later. They were brave men and noble fighters, and it grieved me that I had been forced to kill them. But I would have willingly depopulated all Barsoom could I have reached the side of my Dejah Thoris, and in no other way. Sheathing my bloody blade, I advanced toward my Martian princess, who stood mutely gazing at me without a sign of recognition. "Who are you, Zodangan?" she whispered. "Another enemy to harass me in my misery?" "I am a friend," I answered, "a once cherished friend." "No friend of Helium's princess wears that medal," she replied. "And yet the voice. I've heard it before. It is not, it cannot be. No, for he is dead." "It is, though, my princess. None other than John Carter," I said. "Do you not recognize me, even through paint and strange metal, the heart of your chieftain?" As I came close to her, she swayed toward me with outstretched hands, but as I reached to take her in my arms, she drew back with a shudder and a little moan of misery. "Too late, too late," she grieved. "Oh, my chieftain that was, and whom I thought dead, had you but returned one little hour before, but now it is too late, too late." "What do you mean, Dejah Thoris?" I cried. "That you would not have promised yourself to the Zodangan prince had you known that I lived? Think you, John Carter, that I would give my heart to you yesterday and today to another? I thought that it lay buried with your ashes in the pits of Warhoon, and so today I have promised my body to another to save my people from the curse of a victorious Zodangan army. But I am not dead, my princess. I have come to claim you, and all Zodanga cannot prevent it." "It is too late, John Carter. My promise is given, and on Barsoom that is final. The ceremonies which follow later are but meaningless formalities. They make the fact of marriage no more certain than does the funeral cortege of a Jeddak again place the seal of death upon him. I am as good as married, John Carter. No longer may you call me your princess. No longer are you my chieftain." "I know but little of your customs here upon Barsoom, Dejah Thoris, but I do know that I love you, and if you meant the last words you spoke to me that day as the hordes of Warhoon were charging down upon us, no other man shall ever claim you as his bride. You meant them then, my princess, and you mean them still. Say that it is true." "I meant them, John Carter," she whispered. "I cannot repeat them now, for I have given myself to another." "Ah, if you had only known our ways, my friend," she continued, half to herself. "The promise would have been yours long months ago, and you could have claimed me before all others. It might have meant the fall of Helium, but I would have given my empire for my Tharkian chief." Then, aloud, she said, "Do you remember the night when you offended me? You called me your princess without having asked my hand of me, and then you boasted that you had fought for me. You did not know, and I should not have been offended. I see that now. But there was no one to tell you that I could not you could okay, let's try this again. But there was no one to tell you what I could not, that upon Barsoom there are two kinds of women in the cities of the red men. The one they fight for that they may ask them in marriage, The other kind they fight for also, but never ask their hands. When a man has won a woman, he may address her as his princess, or in any of the several terms which signify possession. You had fought for me, but had never asked me in marriage. And so when you called me your princess, you see, she faltered, I was hurt. But even then, John Carter, I did not repulse you as I should have done, until you made it doubly worse by taunting me with having won me through combat. I do not need to ask your forgiveness now, Deja Thoris, I cried. You must know that my fault was of ignorance of your Barsoomian customs, what I failed to do through implicit belief that my petition would be presumptuous and unwelcome. I do now, Deja Thoris. I ask you to be my wife, and by all the Virginian fighting blood that flows in my veins, you shall be. No, John Carter, it is useless, she cried hopelessly. I may never be yours while Sabthan lives. You have sealed his death warrant, my princess. Sabthan dies. Not nor that either, she hastened to explain. I may not wed the man who slays my husband even in self-defense. It is custom. We are ruled by custom upon Barsoom. It is useless, my friend. You must bear the sorrow with me, that at least we may share in common that and the memory of the brief days among the Tharks. You must go now, nor ever see me again. Goodbye, my chieftain that was. Disheartened and dejected, I withdrew from the room, but I was not entirely discouraged, nor would I admit that Deja Thoris was lost to me until the ceremony had actually been performed. As I wandered along the corridors, I was as absolutely lost in the mazes of winding passageways as I had been before I had discovered Deja Thoris's apartments. I knew that my only hope lay in escape from the city of Zodanga, for the matter of the 4 dead guardsmen would have to be explained, and as I could never reach my original post without a guide, suspicion would surely rest on me so soon as I was discovered wandering aimlessly through the palace. Presently I came upon a spiral runway leading to a lower floor, and this I followed downward for several stories until I reached the doorway of a large apartment in which there were a number of guardsmen. The walls of this room were hung with transparent tapestries, behind which I secreted myself without being apprehended. The conversation of the guardsmen was general, and awakened no interest in me until an officer entered the room and ordered 4 of the men to relieve the detail who were now guarding the Princess of Helium. Now, I knew, my troubles would commence in earnest, and indeed they were upon me all too soon, for it seemed that the squad had scarcely left the guard-room before one of their number burst in again breathlessly, crying that they had found their 4 comrades butchered in the antechamber. At a moment, the entire palace was alive with people. Guardsmen, officers, courtiers, servants, and slaves ran helter-skelter through the corridors of the apartment, carrying messages and orders and searching for signs of the assassin. This was my opportunity, and, slim as it appeared, I grasped it, for as a number of soldiers came hurrying past my hiding place, I fell in behind them, and followed through the mazes of the palace, until in passing through the great hall I saw the blessed light of day coming in through a series of larger windows. Here I left my guides, and slipping to the nearest window, sought for an avenue of escape. The windows opened upon a great balcony, which overlooked one of the broad venues of Zodanga. The ground was about 30 feet below, and at a like distance from the building was a wall fully 20 feet high, constructed of polished glass, about a foot in thickness. To a red Martian, escape by this path would have appeared impossible, but to me, with my earthly strength and agility, it seemed already accomplished. My only fear was in being detected before darkness fell, for I could not make the leap in broad daylight while the court below and the avenue beyond were crowded with Zodangans. Accordingly, I searched for a hiding place and finally found one, by accident, inside a huge hanging ornament which swung from the ceiling of the hall and about 10 feet from the floor. Into the capacious bowl-like vase I sprang with ease, and scarcely had I settled down within it than I heard a number of people enter the apartment. The group stopped beneath my hiding place, and I could plainly overhear their every word. "It is the work of Heliumites," said one of the men. "Yes, O Jeddick, but how had they access to the palace? I could believe that even with the diligent care of your guardsmen, a single enemy might reach the inner chambers. But how a force of 6 or 8 fighting men could have done so unobserved is beyond me. We shall soon know, however, for here comes the royal psychologist." Another man now joined the group, and after making his formal greetings to his ruler, said, "O mighty Jeddick, it is a strange tale I read in the dead minds of your faithful guardsmen. They were felled not by a number of fighting men, but by a single opponent." He paused to let the full weight of this announcement impress his hearers, and that his statement was scarcely credited was evidenced by the impatient exclamation of incredulity which escaped the lips of Thancosus. "What manner of weird tale are you bringing me, Notan?" he cried. "It is the truth, my Jeddick," he replied, the psychologist. "In fact, the impressions were strongly marked upon the brain of each of the 4 guardsmen. Their antagonist was a very tall man wearing the medal of one of your own guardsmen, and his fighting ability was little short of marvelous, for he fought fair against the entire 4 and vanquished them by his surpassing skill and superhuman strength and endurance. Though he wore the medal of Zodanga, my Jeddick, such a man was never seen before in this or any other country upon Barsoom. The mind of the Princess of Helium, whom I have examined and questioned, was a blank to me. She has perfect control, and I could not read one iota of it. She said that she had witnessed a portion of the encounter, and that she looked there, when she looked, there was but one man engaged with the guardsmen, a man whom she did not recognize as ever having seen. "Where is my erstwhile savior?" spoke another of the party, and I recognized the voice of the cousin of Thancosus, whom I had rescued from the green warriors. "By the medal of my first ancestor," he went on. "But the description fits him to perfection, especially as to his fighting ability." "Where is this man?" cried Thancosus. "Have him brought to me at once. What know you of him, cousin? It seems strange to me now that I think upon it, that there should have been such a fighting man in Zodanga, of whose name even we were ignorant before today. And his name, too, John Carter. Who ever heard of such a name upon Barsoom?" Word was soon brought that I was somewhere to be found, either in the palace or at my former quarters in the barracks of the Air Scout Squadron. Cantos Can they had found and questioned, but he knew nothing of my whereabouts, and as to my past, he had told them that he knew as little, since he had but recently met me during our captivity among the Warhoons. "Keep your eyes on this other one," commanded Thancosus. "He also is a stranger, and likely as not they both hail from Helium. Where one is, we shall sooner or later find the other. Quadruple the air patrol, and let every man who leaves the city by air or ground be subjected to the closest scrutiny." Another messenger now entered with word that I was still within the palace walls. "The likeness of every person who has entered or left the palace grounds today has been carefully examined, concluded the fellow, and not one approaches the likeness of this new Padwar of the guards, other than that which was recorded of him at the time he entered. Then we shall have him shortly, commented Thancosus contentedly. And in the meanwhile, we will repair to the apartments of the Princess of Helium and question her in regard to the affair. She may know more than she cared to divulge to you, Notan. Come. They left the hall, and as darkness had fallen without, I slipped lightly from my hiding place and hastened to the balcony. Few were in sight, and choosing a moment when none seemed near, I sprang quickly to the top of the glass wall, and from there to the avenue beyond the palace grounds. And there we go. That concludes chapter 22. Lots of stuff going on. Long chapters this time. Thank you for joining me for today's reading. I hope you can come back on Friday, and we will read another 2 chapters. And as I said, we are reaching near the end. We will conclude next Wednesday, a week from today. And so tomorrow I'll put up the list of possible titles and ask the members of the group to suggest a title that they would like and vote for it basically in the comments of the Facebook page. So I hope you can take a look at it or come up with your own great ideas. Always open to new ideas. And otherwise, we will see you in 2 days on Friday at 4 p.m. Thank you, everyone. Take care.